In conversation with Carol Jameson. Carol Jameson is a Bay Area educator, swimmer, and pianist. She is the author of Adam and Leonora, a surrealist story of an artist and extreme muses. She created and coedited the online zine Hello Goodbye Apocalypse, a journey of pandemic writing and artwork, and is the author of the Kaiser stories and its build on the brain. Currently, she writes two blogs, Purrs, a collection of swimming stories, and Walk with CJ, a collection of walking stories that began during the pandemic. She has an MFA in creative writing and literature from Muse College and teaches writing in San Francisco Bay Area colleges. She lives in Richmond, California, with her naughty orange tabby cat, Clara. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy, and excitement to have on the show today, Carol Jameson. How are you doing today, Carol?
I'm great. Very happy to be here, Peter. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm very excited actually to have you on the show today. Quite excited we are here to sit down and have a conversation around your book. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, my pleasure.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Cara, I need to first say that I was really, first of all, excited, impressed, and intrigued to having discovered your book, the one titled Adam and Leonora on Amazon. And I would like us to start today's interview, today's conversation, by you telling us how this book came to be, what inspired the making of it. When was the time you realized that you wanted to be a writer? When was that time you realized that you needed to tell a story and you needed to title it Adam and Leonora? If you can run us through the background, the making, the foundation of the book, that would be great.
Okay, I'd love to. Um, I actually have not been a writer my entire life, although my mother will always say I wrote stories as a child.
Oh.
But I didn't seriously take it up until after I got my degree from UC Santa Cruz in literature and
Mm.
was at a loose end scooping ice cream at the boardwalk and thought, okay, I'll take a creative writing class and see what happens. So that was many decades ago at this point, and I've been writing ever since then. So that's sort of the foundation of my writing. But I'm a big reader. I've always been a voracious reader. So with this book, what happened was that I was in a master's degree of transformative arts at the University JFK in Berkeley.
Wow.
And my cohort went out to visit the Lucid Art Foundation in Inverness, California, where Gordon Onslow Ford, the surrealist painter, had a studio.
Mm.
And the woman who took us on a tour of the studio opened up the big barn door, and I walked into his studio, and everything was exactly as it had been 10 years ago when he had passed. There were still
Mm.
huge paintings on the walls that were half finished. His paints were all over the tables. His shoes were there with like paint spatters on it. His
Mm.
brushes were on the table. And I walked in and I got a chill and I thought, oh my goodness, I need to write about this person. I
Mm.
feel him in my bones. And what's his story? And how do I like start with it? And that's where I start too, is that kind of moment of walking into a studio and feeling him and thinking, I've known nothing about Gordon Onslow Ford. I want to find out more about him. And then I want to see what happens if I start with that germ of the idea and
Mm.
what transpires. So this is loosely based on his life, very loosely. I take a lot of creative license with
Wow.
his story.
Mm.
And our protagonist, Leonora, is really a blend of myself and other writers and artists. And then there are also real life historical figures. Andre
Mm.
Breton is Adam's compatriot and companion. And he was, of course, one of the founders of surrealism with his manifesto. And so there are
Mm.
quotes from his manifesto throughout the book. And
Wow.
then Remedios Varo was also a surrealist painter during this time. And I did a little bit of research with her, but she's friend and companion for Leonora.
Mm.
And then Mimi, the sultry, sexy singer from Paris in his Paris days, I completely made up.
Wow.
She's not based on anybody at all. And
Mm.
so people will ask me, where did Mimi come from? I'm like, I don't know. She floated out of the air. I was in Paris in the 30s and I heard her singing and I
Mm.
had to write it down. So I
Wow.
think, Henry James writes about that idea of the seed of a story or the spark of a story. And I think that spark for me happened when I walked into Gordon Onslow Ford's studio
Mm.
and I felt his presence and I just knew I had to write about him. I didn't realize it would evolve into this novel,
Wow.
although I had a sense that it would. But um, at the point that it actually hit me that I needed to write about him, I
Mm.
don't think I had envisioned this book. And I look at this book now and I think, I wrote that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's one of those things like,
Feeling.
wow,
Yeah.
I had no idea. So the inspiration, in this particular case was very concrete and really happened from walking into his
Mm.
studio and hearing Fariba Barazan, who runs the Lucid Arts Foundation, talk about him. Her
Wow.
reverence for him and her love for him really came through in her tour. And I thought, wow, who was this person?
Mm.
So it really is a fictionalization of him, because I really stopped myself from doing too much research. I didn't want my book to be a nonfiction research sort of book. I wanted it to be a novel. And so
Mm.
I didn't do a lot of research intentionally because I wanted to just let my imagination flow.
Wow.
So yeah.
Wow. I must.
It was fun. The drafting of it was very fun because I never knew where it was going to go each day when I sat down.
Yeah, I must say that I am so impressed hearing you talk about the inspiration behind the making of this book.
Hmm.
I'm so
Hmm.
into, and I love your excitement also talking about it. I can
Yes.
feel it in your word. I can feel it in your intonation. I can feel it in your expression, and even in your smile, right? Like, it's quite
Hmm.
amazing and quite beautiful. This is very great. I must say it's a lovely ride, a lovely introduction into becoming an author. Quite commendable, really.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Yes.
It's a
It's been
lovely
my
one.
it's been my life. I know you're a
Mm,
poet, so you know what the writing life is like. It has its ups
absolutely.
and its downs, but
Absolutely.
I would not trade it for anything.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Same
You
as
must agree
mine.
with that too, to be a poet. A poet, I think, is even full of more challenges than a writer.
The
Yeah.
writer. Yeah. Oh, wow. That
Hmm.
was so beautiful, Carol. Thank you. Thank you so
Yes.
much. And also, your book blends surrealism, creativity, and self-discovery in such a beautiful, evocative, impactful, and realistic manner. And that
Hmm.
got me wondering, I wanted to ask you, what themes were you most excited to explore in the novel?
I think really the themes of friendship and how people can come together, whether it's over the creative process and art or
Yeah.
a common friendship, but that through these friendships, people can discover things about themselves that they never knew.
Never
They can
knew.
take paths in life that they never ever dreamed of in the past. And so I think that theme of friendship and what a friendship can bring to a life is really an important theme in the book. And then there's also a lot of dreams in the book. And so some of these dreams are taken from my own dreams. In fact, I think all of them are. I
Hmm.
have a very
Wow.
rich dream life. Um, but a lot of the time, dreams are a way into discovering more about yourself and discovering the creative process. I think Leonora uses her dreams as a way into researching about art, but she also
Hmm.
uses her dreams as a way of discovering more about herself and realizing, oh, whoops, I really do need to go pursue this path and learn more about Adam because I had a dream about him where I heard him talking from the redwoods and
Wow.
his voice came down to me And then I spoke to him later, and he had had the same dream. And so we had this connection.
Hmm.
So I think there's that surrealist element in my novel and my telling. And surrealism, just very loosely, is that kind of um, very thin wall between reality and dream life and what we call surreality.
Hmm.
And so this book isn't about surrealism,
Hmm.
but surrealism, I think, comes into it. And I
Hmm.
think I'm no expert on surrealism, but I loved um, some of the quotes from Andre Breton's manifesto,
Wow.
where he talks about automatic writing. And so, Leonora will hear Breton say to her, "Oh, just write it." Or Pauline, Adam's future wife, has a
Hmm.
terrible time with getting started with her novel. And she
Hmm.
hears Adam's lecture, and he says, "I practiced automatic writing. I practice letting the art flow from my brush and just letting it out." And
Hmm.
so I think that theme of the creative process and the mystery around it, and where does inspiration come from, and dreams are part of it, but I think
Yeah.
also just allowing yourself to be open
Hmm.
to what might happen on the page or what might happen on the canvas
Hmm.
is a theme that is explored in the novel too.
Absolutely. Oh,
Um,
wow. That is such.
so, so yeah, so there's a lot in there. Yes.
It's a lot in there, really. I love your description of that. And I've been enjoying your response to this question so far, really. Quite beautiful and quite amazing. And I would like to raise the book to the camera again. I know you have a
Oh,
one
sure.
behind you.
Yeah,
Yeah, a
here it
lovely
is.
one in there. Would you like to talk about the making of the cover?
Oh, yes. It's actually a illustration done by Rebecca Lowen,
Oh,
Lown,
mm,
and she sent
yeah.
me several images of blue in painting because blue is a color that Leonora is obsessed with.
Beautiful.
And it really is everything that's at the forefront of her mind and part of her creative process and the painting that she does and the words
Mm,
that she comes up with. And
interesting.
blue is the sky and blue is the sea and blue is her mood and blue is music. And so blue is
Yeah,
a big motif in the
yeah,
novel.
yeah.
And so when Rebecca sent me ideas for the cover, she had several that were like blue paintings. And I chose this one because it was the most abstract and I thought the most vibrant and the most evocative for a reader to pick up. I've had a lot of people say, "Ooh, I love that cover.
It is
It's so
fun.
enticing and so seductive,"
Yeah,
and I think so many of us read on the phone now, right?
yeah, yeah.
That the cover is something that is maybe becoming a lost art, which I hope that doesn't
Mm,
happen. But
I hope
I
so.
really just admire Rebecca's covers so much
That's
because
an
I think it
amazing.
really speaks to Adam's process and the motif of blue in the book.
Mm, yeah.
So thank you, Rebecca Lowen, for your beautiful
Oh,
cover.
amazing shout out you've got in there. Beautiful,
Yes, yes.
beautiful.
And
Thank
then,
you.
on the cover too, you can't see it, but Jonathan Lethem, the New York Times bestselling author, who is
Awesome.
a friend of mine, writes about the book. And he says, Carol Jameson has a rare talent for delight, a midsummer night's dream of pure storytelling intoxication.
Wow.
So, I mean,
That's a
Lethem
catchy
helped
one.
me out with comparing me to Shakespeare of all things.
That's a lovely endorsement. That's a
Yes.
beautiful one. Thank
So
you.
that's also on the cover too. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great one, Carol. And you
Yes.
also
Yeah.
you weave in real historical figures like
Mm-hmm.
Burton, Onslow
Mm-hmm.
Ford, and Ramsey
Mm-hmm.
Varro in your book.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious,
Yes.
how do they fit into Leonora's world? And why were they essential so much to the story? And also, who is your favorite character in the book? And what is it about them that speaks to you the most?
um, I think that the characters were based on historical people that were around during the time
Yeah.
of one of the periods of the book. The book begins in 1930s Paris, and then it goes to 1940s New York and
Wow.
Mexico, where the surrealists started in New York.
Mm.
Actually, they started in Europe, and then they had to leave Europe because of the war,
Wow.
and came to
It's
New York. And
beautiful.
then they went to Mexico because I think that was just a meeting place that was very supportive of their art, and maybe it might have been a little cheaper to live there. I'm not sure, but a lot of them migrated to
Yeah.
Mexico. And so Remedios Varo lived in Mexico, so that's one of the reasons that she comes into the book, and she just became a perfect sort of companion for Leonora. And so when Leonora
Mm.
had questions about her life or her art or her work, Remedios, because she was an artist herself and ran into the challenges of creative blocks, she would, help Leonora out with blocks, and she would
Wow.
be that sort of sounding board for Leonora.
Mm.
And so Remedios came into the book in Mexico in 1940s. And then
Mm.
Breton, I think I did a little bit of research that he actually did know Gordon Onslow Ford, but I could be making that up too.
Mm.
But he and Onslow Ford are companions. So again, it's that idea of friendship.
Mm.
And so Breton is somebody that tells Adam, he's sort of his conscience a lot of the time.
Mm.
Adam will say, "Oh, this Mimi, I love her." And Breton will say, "Oh, she is not the one for you, my friend. She is
Mm.
just a frivolity. You don't need to waste your time with him." And Adam will be, "Well, wait a minute." So they have a lot of back and forth. And I think
Yeah.
Breton adds that sort of devil's advocate for
Mm.
Onslow Ford, but also he adds a bit of levity and a bit of humor
Mm.
to the book. And then Wolfgang Paulin was also an artist and a writer and a surrealist that was in Mexico at the time
Mm.
of Leonora's visit to the hacienda in Mexico. And so
Mm.
he becomes a working colleague with Pauline, who is Onslow Ford's wife, and they put
Wow.
together a magazine that Wolfgang Paulin actually did have a magazine that he called the DIJ Journal, I believe.
Mm.
And so that comes into the Mexico part of it. And Leonora gets a little crush on Wolfgang. So
Oh.
they have their kinds of relationships with my main characters of Adam, Leonora, Pauline,
Mm.
Mimi, and they are something I think that makes the novel feel a little more complete and full. It's like it's a world, right, that you want to
Yeah.
create for a reader.
Yeah.
Um, I have to say my favorite character is Breton,
Mm.
just because he cracks me up a lot of the time. I would be writing something about him, and then something would pop into my
Oh.
head where he would say, "Oh, what are we going to do with these blue giraffes and purple elephants?" And I'd be like, "Where did that come from?" So I would like just start cracking up as I was writing.
Wow.
And so I think, of all the characters, he's probably my favorite. Although Leonora, I think, is close to my heart because I think she
Mm.
really is a part of me. And her
Mm.
challenges around writing and art and self-discovery, I think,
Mm.
speaks to me. But also, I think to anybody that has delved into the creative world, right? And whether they're
Mm.
an author or a poet or a painter or a musician, there are a lot of places for self-doubt, I think.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so I think, Leonora has this, but I think through her journey and her friendship with Adam and Remedios, um, and, she has a family and a daughter, and, so that there's, a lot of time that goes by in the novel. And through that time, she
Absolutely.
does change and she does discover things about herself that she didn't know about when she first met Adam at that lecture in the
Mm.
1940s.
Oh, wow.
So, again, I'm sorry, Leonora didn't meet him. Pauline, his wife, met him. See, I get mixed up
Mm.
myself, right? Pauline was the one that went to Adam's lecture in the 40s and became entranced with him and it later married him.
Mm.
So the novel's divided. The novel's clearer than probably my telling of it. That it's divided into sections where we have different voices. We have Leonora's voice, which
Mm.
is in the current like 2000s in Santa Cruz, and then we have Pauline's voice,
Wow.
which is in the 1940s in New York and Mexico, and
Wow.
then we have Mimi's voice, where she starts in the 30s in Paris, but she continues on
Mm.
throughout all of the 40s up until the 90s. So
Mm.
she's long lived and she becomes, well, I won't give too much away, but she's somebody that is throughout the whole novel. So I think
Wow.
the novel's divided into those different voices and different points of view.
Wow.
Um,
That's an amazing transition I think you've got in there. And I love your deep, lovely, extensive answer on my question around that. The favorite character and how
yes.
Essentia, Brighton, Oxlow, and Remedios Vara's story were to
Hmm.
you in fixing it together
Yes.
with
Yes.
Laura's word. That's
Yes.
amazing
Yes.
and quite beautiful. And now I'd
Yes.
like us to transition a little bit into the conversation of readers' feedback. Because
Mm,
one of the things that I love so much as a writer is to listen, grab a cup of tea, sit down,
hmm.
fold my hands, and
Hmm.
listen to readers' feedback.
Yes.
You want to
Yes.
agree with me that one of the things that makes literature to be quite complex is the
Hmm.
fact that it can be interpreted in different ways by different
Yes.
readers based on their
Yes.
opinions.
Yes.
Sometimes some
Yes.
readers might get a message the author intended. Sometimes
Hmm.
they might be close to get to the message. Sometimes they might be far from getting to the message.
Right.
And
Right.
sometimes as well, they might just hilariously misunderstand the book and interpret it upside down. You know,
Hmm.
as hilariously fun as they sound, I would like to ask you, how do you feel when readers interpret your work differently than you intended as an author? How does that make you feel as a storyteller? I'm just curious.
Yeah. It's a really interesting question because I don't know that I had a specific intention when I like put the book
Write a
out
book.
there.
Mm.
But like you say, when you hear readers give you feedback, it's surprising. I
Yeah.
did a talk with a book club, and they were very shy, and I think a little. I don't want to say in awe of me as like an authors at our book club, but I
Yeah,
think
you know,
there was
yeah.
a certain shyness because they didn't
Yeah.
know me and they were all
Excitement
very
as
tight
well.
knit. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But one of the women said to me, well, Leonora didn't really come alive for me until the scene where she goes to the beach and she muses about the blues and the blue of the sea and the blue of the sky. And you bring in her blue clothes and how that blue consciousness
Mm.
shapes her. And I didn't really connect with her until you had that scene. And I
Wow.
thought, well, now that's really interesting because I connect
Mm.
with her immediately, of course.
Mm.
But
Wow.
this reader, took 100 pages or so, and to her credit, continued reading
Mm.
until she got to this scene. And I thought, well, that's really interesting because I didn't have that intention for
Yeah.
people to hone in on that scene. But this particular reader did. And then
Mm.
on the flip side, when I asked the group about dreams, because dreams are such a big part of my life and they are, prevalent in the book, they
Yeah.
all kind of looked at me dumbfounded, like, we don't remember our dreams, Carol. So I had an idea that dreams would be, a place where people could connect with the characters and with their own dream life. And
Mm.
with this particular group, it didn't happen. So that was surprising for me. And we went on to talk about something else, and I talked about my dreams, and they just kind of
Mm.
looked at me like, wow. But so again, I think, when you get that feedback from an audience, it's really interesting. I did a reading a year ago, and one of the audience members said, Carol, did you create an outline before you wrote this
Right.
book?
It's
Because it's so complex. And I said,
mm.
I tried.
I
but
know.
I couldn't stick to it. And she said, "Wow, I don't know how you did that." I said, "Frankly, I don't know how I did it either."
She said, we are
But
both
it's like that
confused. We
when you
don't
get
know.
that kind of, feedback from people and you're like, that's a good question. I
Yeah.
never thought about it, but
Yeah.
yes, I did try to make an outline and no, it was not a viable way for me
Yeah.
to work through the book.
Yeah.
So I think that intention is like, who knows? I think, when I
No.
go and look at a piece of art, when I look at Onslow Ford's art, for instance, and I have, oh, here, this is very small,
Hmm.
um, but
Look at
his
that.
art is huge. Like,
Hmm.
so this painting would be, gigantic, like 7 feet by 5 feet, just
Wow.
humongous. And
Wow.
so when I look at it, I just get emotions from it, like from the colors and the energy. I just feel in awe. And, who knows what he intended? Maybe he was just having fun with like splatters
Hmm.
of paints and circles, lines, and dots. I don't know. But I think when you put a piece of art into the world, however it lands on somebody, I'm just happy they're reading it.
Hmm.
And whatever they get from it is wonderful. And if it's not what I intended, then I really honestly am happy to hear the feedback. I think it's really interesting. Does that happen for you? Like with a poem, do you?
Absolutely. I think there's a huge level of connectivity between your answer to
Mhm,
this question and relatability. You mentioned that, somebody was asking you, how were you able to plan it? Because it's quite complex. How were you able to do it? You're like, well, I tried planning it, but it never go with the planning, it just pop up
mhm,
sometimes. And sometimes even when you try to plan and write a book, you may at first keep going with it. Maybe you get to the middle and the book just tell you that, don't worry, Clara, I want you to take us on a different direction. We will speak to your
exactly.
head, and you just are like, okay, all right, thank you. That's why you were like, oh, you had no idea. You don't know how you're able to do it yourself, because it's very surprising and shocking that even sometimes the end product of the book got you amazed. Did I really wrote
Exactly.
that? No.
Exactly.
How did I do it? I don't know. That's
Exactly.
amazing.
Exactly. It is. It is. Like one of the people in the book group said to me, "Well, how did you come up with the character Francois?" And I said, "I don't
I
know. He
know.
just like Leonora was in the kitchen making dinner and her husband walked in and I'm like,
I don't
"Well, where did
know.
he come from?" I don't know.
I don't know. I just don't know. Even though I am the author, I can't tell. You know, I can't point a finger and say, okay, this was actually what I just don't know. All I knew is that I
Exactly.
wrote and it's just there. I created a
Exactly.
story that sometimes it's even hard for me to tell where exactly they're coming from, to tell where exactly the
Exactly.
characters emanated from. I don't know.
Exactly.
It's just the beauty, the amazing stank of what it feels to be an author, the beauty of
Hmm.
creativity, the love of writing, and
Exactly.
it's just so lovely to be frankly speaking. I can relate to that even as a poet. Sometimes when I go back
Oh, I
to my
imagine.
work, I'll be like, that was so deep. How did I end up writing that? Like, I was like, and I was very young back then. I can't imagine. Well, I don't know. I was like, I don't think I can write like that currently, but I don't know how I did that. But that was really amazing. There's this reflection state that we get to as a writer that even our
Hmm.
homework becomes a shock to ourselves, becomes a misery
Yes.
to ourselves, that we find it quite very hard to tell that this is actually very weighty. And this is one of the reasons why I feel like writers actually needs to be praised for their work the more. They needed to be compensated
Hmm.
for their work because it's not an easy
Hmm.
job, right? And it's a
No,
beautiful
it's not.
talent. It's a lovely skill. It's one that not so many people can just jump in. It's just for
Right.
certain exceptional personality. It's amazing, really. We can go on and on and on having a conversation
Yes,
about this single conversation because one answer would lead to another one, would lead to another one, and it's just so beautiful, really. It's
it
beautiful.
is. It is. Yeah. I feel very lucky and blessed to have the talent and the skill and
Mm,
the passion and desire to
yeah.
continue with it. Because I think, it took a long time to write this novel, and it took another couple years to get it published. And so I think you have to have a lot of stamina to be a writer.
And patience as well.
Patience.
Tenacity. So you don't like, oh God, I'm tired already. When is this going to be done? Oh, jeez.
Exactly.
It's a beautiful one. So lovely about both in this creative field. It's so amazing, really. It's
It
such an
is.
amazing journey. It's
It
quite a
really
journey.
is.
Quite a
Yeah,
journey. Oh, thank you for
absolutely.
that, Carol. That was a beautiful answer you've got in there.
Thank
That
you.
was a
Yeah,
beautiful
thanks for
one.
asking. Yes.
Absolutely. I also like to ask you, because your novel delves deeply into their stick journey. And I'm
Mhm.
curious, I mean, I think this even stylishly relates to what we've been talking about so far, but I wanted to ask you, how does the creative process shape or inform the story as it unfolds from one chapter to another, from one page to another? And also,
Uh,
you've told a very lovely story. I'm not quite sure if this is going to be a serious one, if just like a single stand novel.
mhm.
Just tell us, run us into that lovely story. I would love to hear, really.
Well, I think, again, it started with that very germ of going into Oslo Ford's studio
Yes. Yeah.
and then hearing Fariba say, it took me 10 years to hone my palette to only the color of blue. And
Mm,
so I took that one line and it just evolved from there. And so each chapter um, sometimes would flow to the next one, but sometimes not.
mm,
I would be going through my day. I'm a swimmer. And so I often think of ideas when I'm just doing that back and forth in the pool. And
wow.
so a snippet of dialogue might come to me, and I'll say, that's where the next chapter starts.
Mm,
Or a sense. I have a seance scene, and I went to a seance back in Italy, oh,
mm,
decades ago.
wow.
And it was in a little town run by a little Italian woman who
Oh.
was a relative of a friend. And she
Mm,
took us into this room, and the room smelled of violets and vanilla. And so
mm,
I remembered that little scene, and I started a scene in Leonora
mm,
from that one memory. And
wow.
so it went from that. And that whole scene evolved from that one memory I had of going to that seance and smelling that smell.
Mm,
Um, and so I think, when you're writing something that's long like this, often it does flow from one sentence to another. Um, but the chapters sometimes don't flow, especially with this. I had a lot of concern about, gosh, I'm jumping around a lot. And I do have a lot of structure in this, which I hadn't really done in past books. I like didn't have this kind of structure to it. I thought, is it working? So there was that kind of feeling like, well, I'm just going to keep going, and it's a draft and see what happens.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
as far as like the sentences flowing, yeah, a scene could happen without my thinking about it much, but between the chapters, sometimes I would really wonder, were there connections that were clear to a reader? And from the feedback I've gotten now, of course, I haven't heard from people that say, I was so confused, Carol, I didn't know what was going on. I had people say, "Oh no, I had no problem with following, the storyline and the characters and their development." Um, so I think, as far as like the words flowing, I mean, I think for a poet, it's very different. I mean, Lorraine Nidecker, I don't know if you know the poet Lorraine Nidecker, but she was a poet who wrote in the 20s about the working life. And she has a great line, and I'm going to just paraphrase this.
Mm,
It's about a character who works in a factory and all of the workers around her. And the character thinks to herself, what would they all say if they knew I spent 2 months on 6 lines of poem? Or maybe it's
mm,
6 months on 2 lines of a poem.
mm,
Um, and so, for her, the reality of being a poet and like honing in her like writing to just those words, and how meticulous she was, and what a
mm,
all-encompassing, job that was, versus I think a novelist, like there's a lot of space in a novel
Yeah, you
to just
know.
write. Whereas like a
Mm,
poem, the words, each word is so important. And even
mm,
I write short stories too. And so even in a short story, the words and the way the sentences fit together are more important, I think, than like
mm.
with a novel. There can be a lot more space for that. And
Yeah.
then I have that editing, revision stage to it too, where I can go through and slice things out too.
Mm,
So the flow of it, I think, depending on what you're, as a poet, I think Lorraine Nidecker, and those, 6 months on 2 lines of poetry, I mean, every word is like super, thought
important.
out. Whereas like with a novelist, okay, I spent some time with word choice in that very last copy editing phase, but when I'm writing it, I just kind of spew it out.
Mm.
And writers
Wow.
have their favorite words too, I think, obviously blue was a favorite word in this book, but I wrote a couple books about Anthony Trollope, and I had a whole list of his favorite words, that he would have, signify and wondrous, and all of those funny Victorian words. So
Mm.
I think writers do have favorite words. So
Yeah, absolutely. I
yeah.
love the part where you mentioned you were jumping around, and I was like, well, I'll be like, I'll just keep jumping around and see if that would become the editor's cup of tea later on.
Uh-huh.
That's a beautiful one, really. That's an amazing one. And I can imagine that statement, taking you like maybe 6 months to be able to craft a particular line in poetry. That's like a
Hmm.
very heavy statement to make, yeah, because it's
Hmm.
saying that, okay, it takes a lot of time, really. Or, like you mentioned, the beauty of every lines, the beauty,
Hmm.
the importance of every sentence being mentioned. Or
Hmm.
like in a novel where you can go extensively if you want to describe the hair, describe the environment, see what happens, look at the
Hmm.
face, the smile, the look of the day when things happened, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
space you need to fill in into there. Where all,
Hmm.
whereas in this other side of poetry or side of another genre of literature, you just have to have the lines one after the other, carefully
Right.
crafted, in from one
Right.
side to another. Just like we're doing a comparison, a similarities and difference between prose and poetry.
Yes.
Quite
Yes.
amazing.
Yes. Yes.
Quite
Well, I thought
amazing.
of that Lorraine Nidecker line because I used to teach poetry, creative writing.
Oh, really?
And so I would use that poem because it had a lot of my students were from working class backgrounds, and
Mm,
so it had a lot of connection for them as far as
mm,
their own personal lives. But that one line was that higher level of like, okay, here's what literature does. And a lot
mm,
of them were like, wow, I never thought about that.
mm,
And I think for me as a fiction writer,
mm,
poetry is like so
mm,
far beyond me because of that word choice and the amount
mm.
of time. And writing does take time. It's a
Of
lot of hard
course.
work. It's a lot of time. And so I think a lot of people read a piece of writing and think, oh, she sat down and wrote that. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it took me 10 years to write it.
That was funny. She sat down and wrote that. Really?
Sat down and wrote that, and there it is.
Oh my goodness. This is such an amazing conversation. Really, a lot of laughter we've got in here today. What beautiful.
Yeah,
You know,
well,
it's
it's you're very easy to talk to, Peter. So,
it is
and I'm
not as easy
talking
as it
about
sounds.
the
She
book
sat down
too.
and
So,
wrote that. This is so beautiful, really. I love it. I love it. And I can go on and on and on and on, really. And I also like to ask,
sure.
apart from Adam and Leonora, do you have another works you've authored or maybe currently working on?
Yes, I'm currently working on two projects. One is kind of taking over right now, but it's a book. I'm hoping it's a novel, but it might be a memoir of my time in Santa Cruz, California as a soda jerk, as an ice cream scooper.
Mm,
So there were lots of shenanigans that went on in
oh,
1980s Santa Cruz. And
wow.
so I think it's an interesting period in history to write about.
Mm,
Um, Especially given the current history that we're in.
right.
And so I think to look back at that time and see the kinds of naivete that we had
Mm,
as living and working in this little beach town,
mm,
and the kinds of shenanigans that people got up to, but also the kinds of tragedies that happened too. AIDS was
mm.
something that was rampant during that time,
Absolutely.
and many people, we forget about it, but I think many
Mm,
people, died and lost their lives. And so, it's not entirely a frivolous book. There are some serious parts to it too. But so
mm.
I'm working on that. And it's called Bad Attitude
Wow.
because I'm the main character with a very bad attitude about scooping ice cream for a living after my degree in literature
Mm,
from UC. So that's the title, the working title.
wow.
And then I'm also working on a collection of my short stories that are evolve around working. So my time at a bookstore in Berkeley,
Mm,
my time teaching in China, and my
mm,
time working as a espresso barista in a coffee store. So
mm,
all of those working stories come together as a kind of comment on the working life with a single woman in this era, but also
mm,
kind of taking you through those points in history and how
mm,
work has changed and the kinds of things that people do. And
mm,
also an exploration of Lana, who's the
mm,
protagonist, and kind of a memoir around her. So those are my
mm.
two projects. So they're big projects. They keep me busy. And then I write
Wow.
my blogs too. I write
Mm,
a walking blog. So, stories that I get from walking around my neighborhood, and then swimming blogs. So stories I get at the pool.
interesting.
So
Wow.
I write those stories all the time.
Wow.
So if I feel like I don't have any creative juice for one of, the bad attitude book, then I'll write a
Up into the
blog story.
blogs.
So
Hmm.
yeah. So um, it's a lot of different avenues, I think.
Wow.
Sometimes I feel like I should just focus on one thing, but I've never been able to do that.
Hmm.
I like do my music. I'm also a pianist, so
Yeah, I saw that. That
I
was
I I play
beautiful.
the piano, I teach piano, and sometimes I think, should I
Wow.
just have focused on piano or
Wow.
should I just have focused on writing? Or, I
Mm,
dabbled a bit in the visual arts. Should I just have focused on that? And so, but I think they all inform each other, I think
yeah.
music and writing have a lot of
So
common ground.
artistic.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
artistic.
So yeah, those are the two projects I'm working on, the main projects.
It's
Yeah.
amazing to know that you're a novelist. You're also a musician. I'm a poet and I'm also a violinist. So I think
Ah,
we have lovely things in common. This is so
yes.
beautiful, really. You know,
Yes.
somebody like, oh yeah, you're a violinist, you're also a writer, you're so artistic. I'm like, yeah, that's a lot of talent we're getting in. Yeah, and I'm ready
Exactly.
to build to
we're
build.
very lucky, I think, to have that outlet, right? I mean,
Mm,
and music is so different from writing in that,
absolutely.
it really is about the emotion. And for me, it's about the pleasure of playing and just
Mm,
sharing it with my students and teaching,
mm,
piano. But I'm currently working on memorizing Debussy's Clair de Lune, and I'm like thinking, is this too much for me?
wow.
And I think, no, I can do it.
I
It's
can
so
do it. I
beautiful.
love that.
So anyway, yeah, the violin and poetry that seems to have, violin is
Soothing. It's
string
so
instruments are so beyond
soothing.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so
Yes.
soothing to me, really. I
Mm-hmm.
particularly had to pick violin of all the instruments. I think I'm interested because I love the sound. I love
Mm-hmm.
the sound of the, oh, just so beautiful. It's so soothing to me, just like poetry is
Mm-hmm.
soothing to me.
Uh-huh.
It's
So
so
it's that
emotional.
ear.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's like a relief. Relief. It gives you
Mm-hmm.
this easiness, this joy that comes from the art. And that's what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things are so therapeutic for me. Writing,
Mm-hmm.
music, in times of depression, in times of sadness, in times of whatever emotion you've got, it just sounds to me like a safe haven where you can run to, what you
Exactly.
can get yourself doing, and you find this unexplainable joy, unexplainable peace that follows it,
Mm-hmm.
unexplainable satisfaction that the
Yes.
sound, that the lines and lyrics in poetry or the
Mm-hmm.
sound of the string of an instrument gives you. It's
Mm-hmm.
all so beautiful. Now I'm speaking, sound as if I'm making a spoken word. I'm making a spoken word artist. That's amazing.
Exactly,
I
exactly.
love it.
Yes. Yeah, there's a
Love it.
musicality to poetry, definitely. And I think that there's a rhythm to prose
Yeah.
also.
Yeah.
Um, you know, um, my partner is an actor, and he's currently Ian Lampton, and he's
Mm.
currently recording Adam and Leonora with our sound engineer, Ben Monson. And
Wow.
he's doing all of the different voices. Um, in Adam and Leonora and recording it. And so there is a musicality, I think, to the rhythm. And then he's very talented. He can make Breton sound French, and he can make Leonora sound a little, off-putting or unsure. And so I think, there's a rhythm to prose too that Ian is going to make come alive. So I'm excited about that,
Yeah.
definitely.
This is so amazing. I must say that from this conversation, I've got an idea to write a poem. I just write out the title. I'm gonna jump on it after this interview. That is
Wonderful.
so, yeah, and I want to say thank you really for this lovely
Oh, my
conversation.
pleasure.
It's so inspiring for me, really. Very inspiring.
Great. Yeah, no, it's very inspiring for me to share my thoughts and have a common ground with you as a
Yeah.
writer and a musician and appreciator of literature.
Thank you so. And just in case we have some viewers who are watching this interview, I would love to get a copy of Adam and Leonora. On what platform are they available on for purchase?
Well, they can always get it on Amazon. So, and I think you're based in London, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if
We have Amazon
bookshop dot
UK. Yeah.
yeah,
That's exclusive.
bookshop.org is in the UK. I'm not sure if they um, ship over there. But I think, you could go to your local bookstore
Yeah.
and they could special order it too. It's available. So hopefully people across the pond will enjoy Adam and Leonora too. So
Yeah.
that would be wonderful. And then, they can go to my website too and their list there. And it's just caroljameson.com. So
Interesting. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Adam and then Laura on Amazon and Barnes& and Nobles on Caro's website and also on other platform. I also left a link to our social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Caro, for accepting the invitation to be featured in P English literature. And also this conversation, it's more than awesome for me. Very great, quite inspiring, educative, amazing, fun, animated, lively, beautiful, and so great for me. And I want to say thank you so much for coming on.
thank you so much, Peter. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I'm so happy I inspired you to write a poem.
Yeah, this is great.